from your perspective, too, when you look at where we're at in the Final Four right now, kind of people figured UConn all year, Purdue, but come on, North Carolina State, and also now you got Alabama. I mean, how great of a story on both sides of the ledger, especially the NC State story, is what they've been able to accomplish.
It is, man. It's so cool because, as you said, you got the two giants and that have really been dominant in college basketball all year. And I got to admit, I mean, as a fan, I've always wanted to see this matchup. You know, I wanted to see UConn against Purdue. That's one side of it. But then the other part of it as a fan is you love these stories, these Alabama stories, these NC State stories. And they are stories, as you mentioned, because the NC State dream here, it really, if you were alive in '83 and you remember that Jimmy Valvano run, like that was so incredible because they were in the same position and Jimmy V was just such a character and they were doing it in such an incredible way. Like they were out of games. And if you remember, Jimmy V they were down like 5 against Pepperdine and Jimmy V just started fouling with like 2 minutes left and they missed free throws. They were out of it, but their run was just as improbable. So because of that, no matter what I see in NC State, I cannot count them out because there is a magic that happens at this time of year. Villanova did it. Villanova was an 8 seed in 1985, an 8 seed, and played the first round in Dayton against Dayton and was out of the game and came back and won it. So in the first round, you're like, all right, Villanova's eliminated. They were an 8 seed. They shouldn't have been in the tournament anyway. And came back to beat Georgetown in the national championship game, which was as dominant with Patrick Ewing as UConn looks right now. So I know enough not to count out NC State and not to count out Alabama. But the Alabama story, too, Nate Oates is a guy that I have communicated with because if you remember, Javon Quinterly transferred from Villanova to Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And we were helpful in that situation. It was just a good move for Javon. And Nate was great with him. And we tried to help him get eligible. So we worked with Nate on it and we become friends. And I know talking to him during the year, he's like, I got to get these guys to defend. Like, we're a great offensive team, but I got to get them to defend better. And what you're really seeing with them is a coach that has never given up on trying to get them to defend. And even into the tournament, kept trying to teach them and demand of them, where in the game against Grand Canyon, they held Grand Canyon scoreless for the last 4 minutes of the game. And really, in the Duke game, their defense was the difference. They held Duke in the 50s. So this is a great story of a coach that never relented and continued to demand of his team to defend while they were one of the best offensive teams ever in college basketball.
No, I love the storyline between that and also the Purdue perspective because, and I'm going to relate this to you and your career because you had success, but then you had some number one seeds, some teams that got eliminated early. It was some questioning around whether you could win the big game or win the big moment, and then you were able to break through. Well, that's the same kind of case that we're looking at with Matt Painter, from the perspective of what happened last year, but also the narrative of the big moment, the big game he can't get through. Outside looking in from you when you finally made that break, when you look at Matt, because there is a similarity, what would you say to Matt in regards to going into the Final Four?
You're so right. I hate to, I like to talk about the other teams. I hate to talk about us. I don't like talking about myself or us, but you're so right about that comparison. We had 2 years in a row, Jimmy, as you know, because you were there with us on the Big East tournament, where we were a number one seed 2 years in a row in 14. I believe it was 14. You help me if I'm wrong, but we lost to Connecticut in the second round, and Connecticut was like, I don't know, man, I think they were like an 11 seed or something like that. And we lost in the second round. They went on to win the national championship. The next year, we were a number one seed again. We might even have been the number one overall seed. And we lost to NC State, who was an 8 seed in the second round. And at the time, you don't realize it, but when you're in the middle of it, I felt like everybody was just killing us. I felt like everybody was, and it probably wasn't as bad as I felt it at the time, but I've actually talked to Matt about this. You feel like everybody just thinks you stink and you can't coach, and they criticize the players and you're losers. And it was 2 years in a row. In 2016, we went to play Iowa in the second round game, and I feel for Matt because I felt like the whole season of 15, 16, and we would talk to our team about this. To everybody else, that whole season didn't matter. And we won the Big East championship regular season. We actually lost in the finals, like similar to Purdue in the Big East tournament. But nobody cared. I felt like nobody cared about anything we did they just wanted to see us get to that second round game and get past it. That's all anybody cared about. And our second round game was in Brooklyn, and we played Iowa, and Iowa was this hot team, one of the best offensive teams in the country. And I'm telling you, honestly, I was nervous as hell going into this game. I was acting in front of my team like it was no big deal. But I remember seeing my president before the game, and my president saying, I have never been so nervous before a game in my life. He said, I don't really care if we win or lose, but I just want everybody to get off your back. And the amazing thing to me was our players had no fear. Ryan Arcidiacono was a senior. Daniel Cheffa was a senior. They had no fear at all. It was kind of like Brian Dutcher going into the UConn game saying, I'm intimidated. When I watch film, I'm intimidated, but I know my players aren't. And I found the same thing with our players. They went into that game. We were up 30. We were up 30 in that game. Our guys were so confident, so aggressive. But once we got past that second round, it was like the weight of the world was off our shoulders and we could just play. And every other game after that was so enjoyable and gave us a freedom, a mental freedom that allowed us to win a national championship, I think. So I think going through it, getting past the second round actually gave us a clear mind and a freedom on a path to a national championship that I think Purdue is enjoying right now. And I think it's going to be amazing. Hope, there's a fan of me wants to see that matchup against UConn.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.